Ducks fans, are you ready? You are listening to the Ducks and Pucks podcast with your hosts, Mike Walters and Eddie Jones. This is the #1 home for Anaheim Ducks talk and analysis. Here we go.
All right, welcome back to the show. This is your host, Mike Walters, along with my co-host, Eddie Jones. We took a week off there. There wasn't too much going on with the Ducks. Everybody was looking around, waiting to see who the coach would be. And bam, today, officially announced Randy Carlyle is back, and he is the Ducks coach again. We'll be covering that in this podcast, pretty much for the majority of the podcast, and we'll also be talking about the Stanley Cup Final, Las Vegas going through the process of getting a new team, and tons of fan questions, and obviously most of them are about Randy Carlyle. So there was an explosion today, Eddie, on social media. A lot of people were pretty much upset or confused, for lack of a better term, of what was going on after the announcement. A lot of people not really too happy that Carlisle is coming back for a second time. So those of you that are listening, I urge you, get into a meditative state. Eddie and I are going to talk about Carlisle and the good and the bad. Yes, there is some good too. I promise you, it's not all bad. So try to relax here, and we'll go into this, Eddie. But what was your initial thought when Carlisle got picked up again by the Ducks?
It was almost like you took this long to really go for the guy we all thought would probably eventually get hired. I know we put out an article where we had like 15 to 20 guys listed as potential guys, but I mean, with Dale Sutter re-signing in LA, there was almost, Randy Carlyle just seemed to be the guy that fit, as awkward as that is for some fans and for a lot of people, bringing in the guy who you fired to replace the guy you hired to replace him. So, it really was, when you look at the comments back when Murray was talking about the guy that, with the team and being like bringing in a guy who, they'll have to be more responsible and he'll hold them accountable for their actions and their play. I mean, really, with the comments you hear again from today from the press conference, it really seems like everything kept coming back to Randy. They interviewed other guys. They had their second round of interviews. It came down to, from what we hear, maybe 2 or 3 guys, and really for Murray, everything just kept coming back to Randy, and it kind of just makes sense. It's the guy that I think this team needs to be the head coach right now. Is difficult as that is for some people to hear. I think it's just, as long as he's evolved his style of play and the way he his teams play, then I think it's the right move for the Ducks at this point, where they are with the franchise.
Yeah, and you bring up some of the concerns. A lot of fans out there are go back to the 2011-2012 season. He leaves. He doesn't get along with a majority of the players. We all remember Getzlaf and Perry, so that's a big issue. The way he did his line changes, the dump and chase play, the way he interacted with the youth, all that stuff. So we're going to kind of break all that down for you in this next little segment here. And then we've got just a bazillion fan questions, because obviously this is, a hot topic. And finally, after 5-6 weeks, we've got, a sense of direction, basically. But I think one of the biggest issues, Eddie, and we can talk about it, is the team leadership. You look at the big three, Getzlaf, Perry, and Kessler, and 2 of the 3 had issue with them in the past. And according to Murray in the press conference today, it sounds like the team leadership is on board. And he actually reached out and talked to the team leadership, which I saw some fan comments and it was interesting. They're like, well, why would Murray talk to the team leadership? Why would he do that? And I think in this situation, it's a little bit different. You're bringing a coach that 2 of the 3 have played for on the Ducks, and then you've also got Kessler, who played, for and back in the AHL. So, all 3 of them have actually really had relationship going back in time. So, I think it was important that Murray did that, and I know there's people out there that are criticizing Murray as well. For what happened this past season, making too many trades and not getting rid of Bruce soon enough and different things like that. But I think, and obviously time will tell in a year or two if this is going to be a bomb move or it's going to be a great move. But I still think he went about it the right way, Eddie. And I think the fact that he talked to the team leadership and the team leadership's on board, I think that problem is going to take its course and it's going to be fine starting the season.
Yeah, and it helps when the majority of the team leadership and the remaining roster from when he coached, there's the captain, the two assistant captains, and really some two other leaders in the locker room. I mean, Getzlaf, Perry, Cogliano, and Fowler are the only four guys that remain from when Carlisle coached the Ducks. And I mean, we've talked about Cogliano and possibly Fowler getting the assistants captain in different times. Obviously, that was before Kessler got it, he's had experience coaching Kessler and Bieksa when they played for Carlisle in the International Hockey League for Manitoba. So, I mean, that's pretty much the whole leadership core in the Ducks locker room right now. And they've all had experience at one time or another in their careers playing under Carlisle. So I think it was a good move for Murray to go in, and he probably talked to each and one of those players that have played under him before. How did they like it? Would they be open for it again? And I don't think it's like any player they would come in and say, "Oh, I'm not going to play for this guy." You're going to have to sign somebody else. So I mean, you would expect most of the comments to be positive, but the fact that he said a lot of them pushed for it, I think that shows a good sign that a lot are welcome to a different style of coaching, a more in your face in a way. And he's still going to have a bit of that, but from what he said in the comments and in the press conferences, he's kind of adapted. He's watched hockey over the last few years and seen how it's changed and what it takes to win now. And, he's obviously been with the Ducks organization over this last season too. So he's familiar with this team. He knows what's going on. So I think, I think it's good that the player's on board.
Yeah, and I think the biggest part too, kind of along the lines of this, is being accountable, and that's an issue that actually Boudreau had with Getzlaf and Perry. If you look at it, he kind of let them do their thing, maybe a little bit too much, and he even admitted that right after the end of Game 7 against Nashville. He talked about that and how maybe he didn't rein him in enough. So if you bring in Carlisle, you're going to get, pretty much the opposite. He's going to hold them accountable. He's going to hold everybody accountable. And I think that's actually a good thing. Recently I was at an event this last week and I talked to some of the higher ups with the Ducks and whatnot about, the situation and the coaching and whatnot. And what I can tell you from some of those conversations is that Carlisle is the type that he doesn't take days off. He does work hard, pushing the team. And obviously, it's going to be somewhat of an adjustment to start the season. There's going to be certain guys that are going to be like, holy crap. I mean, we're going to be working our butts off. But if you look out in the long term, it will work. And we'll go through some of the other concerns and stuff like that. Certain things that we got to talk about. But like in anything, Eddie, I think it's better that you put in the work, you hold the guys accountable, and you go forward. I think one thing that was kind of iffy, especially in the playoffs and towards the stretch. And don't get me wrong, it depended on the schedule, but sometimes we would be doing the updates and we'd notice the Ducks would take off practice pretty frequently. And I mean, I get it when the team's injured and banged up and whatnot, but I think at the same time you got to keep a rhythm, keep the guys going and in the flow of the game, and I think that just helps the team out in the long run.
Yeah, and like you said, you mentioned that some of the guys, like the newer guys, obviously guys who haven't coached under Carlisle before, like Raquel and Lindholm, and obviously if Theodore's up next year, and depending on who comes back, Vaughn and Dupre and other guys, I think, like we mentioned before, having six guys who are pretty much the core of the Ducks lineup. They've been there the longest, or they're the most experienced. The oldest guys, the three leaders, and obviously plus Bieksa, Cogliano, and Fowler, who obviously contribute to that leadership in the Ducks dressing room, and the fact that they all know how he coaches or how he used to coach, and I have an idea of what it's like to play under him. It will help the transition from a new coach into the next season, and they'll be able to help out the newer players with that. And I think that's a good sign. Other than bringing in, say if obviously Travis Green was in the running and a couple other guys, if you bring in a new guy where nobody has any idea how he coaches, what he's like with his players, the transition is a lot different. And we saw that when Boudreau first came in, and it was a big difference from when Carlisle was coaching way back then. So I think it's good that some guys have experienced before, and it'll help ease the transition Obviously, they need to win now, so that's a big thing.
Yeah, and just so people know, when the news came out to me, obviously we knew about it in advance, as there were some other reports coming out in the days leading up to this, and then obviously today was the official one. I really had a 50-50 split on this. I wasn't like super happy and excited, but I wasn't really as frustrated as a lot of you are out there because, um, and we'll go into this basically now, but if you look at the defense, and you look at the special teams, Carlisle does very well at those situations. And what was the strength of the Ducks last year? It was the defense and it was the special teams. That's what got this team out of the hole in the beginning of the first couple of months and turned them around. So him bringing that kind of that play and that focus, and even Kessler mentioned that too in an article that was put out in Canada about a week or two ago. I think all that's going to be the stuff that's going to work and is going to be the good base for the Ducks to do well in the regular season and in the playoffs. I think on the flip side, the biggest concern for me, Eddie, is going to be the offense, and in terms of the line changes, the dump and chase, which I mean, I know he said today in the press conference that he's not doing the same things he did 10 years ago. But I think it's a legitimate concern, Eddie, as far as on the offensive side of the puck, and that's where I have some reservations.
Yeah, and obviously, the Ducks blue line is still young. They've come off a very good season. They've got more experience. They're very mobile, which, contributes to how the game of hockey is played this year. Obviously, we saw the Penguins win and how mobile their blue line is and how quick in transition. And everybody talked about speed and getting the puck up to your forwards. And obviously, that's going to be fine for the Ducks next year. The goalie situation will be worked out. But the real problem is, and a lot of the turnover will be too, is up front. And obviously, we'll see Getzlaf and Perry and Kessler and the main core back. But we'll see a lot of new guys back. We're still waiting to hear what's going to happen with McGinn and Perron, Perry, obviously Raquel as well, and a couple other guys up front. So this team is going to be different next year, and it'll be interesting to see how Carlisle deals with it. I mean, from what we've seen, his time in Anaheim and his time in Toronto, like you said, his forte is in dealing with special teams and defense, and I don't want to say he struggled dealing with the forwards, and I think it's definitely a different situation from when he coached in Anaheim back in '05 to 2011, and definitely when he coached in Toronto from 2011 to 2015. I think it's a completely different situation from either of those two teams. So it'll be interesting to see how he takes it on. But it's definitely, I guess, if you want to be concerned about something, I think it's definitely something you can be concerned about going into the season.
Yeah, and I think part of this is going to be an adjustment, and this is what we talked about before, Eddie. Whoever the new coach is going to be, there's going to be an adjustment, especially with the line rushes, because we don't know who's going to come back for sure and who's going to stay. We've got the draft coming up, and then the free agency right behind that. And given the situation with the RFAs and the UFAs that are out there, and you mentioned a bunch of them already, there is going to be new players coming in and other players going out. So it's just going to be interesting to say the least, because obviously preseason will get started in September, and then October, November. I think there'll be somewhat of a filling out process. Like you said, there is a core there already. So if they can bring back some of these other players that a lot of us felt did well this season, Perron, again, like you mentioned, obviously you want to have Lindholm and Vatanen. If you can't get both, at least one of them for sure, you want to bring them back. So I mean, there's a lot of that has to be taken into account. But I think once it can get that roster set up, you're not going to see Carlisle go crazy and changing lines all the time. And obviously that was another concern that people had about Boudreaux. He used to change the lines so much, and people were like, "Hey, stop! This is too much." So you won't get that. I mean, obviously right in the beginning we will, but eventually you won't see that as much. So I think that is just going to be a filling out process. But the other bigger issue is probably the dump and chase strategy, which he addressed that. He said that he's not going to be doing the exact same thing as before. So that's something we have to look at, Eddie. And you and I have talked about that. I mean, obviously, there's times when you bring the puck through the neutral zone, and the other teams and almost all teams employ some kind of a trap formation, on the defense that you have to dump it in. But and you talked about this, or actually we talked about this before we started the show. But a big thing is the transition game. And looking at the Penguins, they really talked about the Penguins today a lot, which, I mean, don't get me wrong, because I like the Penguins too. But I think that's going to be the key, Eddie, is maybe not so much the speed, but the neutral zone game and getting the puck out of your own zone.
Yeah, and it's not just the Penguins. I mean, you look at all four teams that made it to the Western Conference and Eastern Conference Finals this year. You look at San Jose, who they move the puck up. They've got a lot of mobile defensemen. So obviously, everybody's familiar with Ben Burns, but they can move the puck up really quick from their own end. Tampa Bay is definitely a good example of that too. Obviously, Pittsburgh. So and even St. Louis to an extent as well. They've got Pietrangelo and Parayko and Shattenkirk back there. So I think that's the way to win this year. And obviously, we've seen Pittsburgh, play to that style of game, and it won them a Stanley Cup this year. And I think the Ducks have the right players in place to play that game. They've got a lot of smart forwards up front who can make quick plays and pass the puck. Obviously, Getzlaf's one of the best passers in the league. Corey Perry is no slouch when it comes to passing either. But you look at that blue line. We're all not sure if Ottonen's going to be back, but you would have to assume Lindholm will be back. Fowler should still be there. Theodore will be up next year. I mean, those are all great puck moving defensemen. You still have Bieksa and Dupre who can move the puck decently too, and Stoner. Obviously, we've all kind of been on about moving the puck, but it's not always about making the most creative pass. It's just making the quick pass, making a quick decision, getting up to your forwards so they can get it in. And we saw the opposite of that against Nashville, where they were dumping it in. They couldn't get any control. They couldn't establish their game, the forecheck that they like to establish, because it always changed from game to game. They would either have quick transition and it would work, or they would decide to dump it in, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. And I think that's something they need to establish this year. Are they going to be a team who builds up most of their play in the neutral zone? And obviously it changes with each team you're going to play, but I think they've got to pick one and decide, are we going to be a team that dumps it in and chases it and forechecks that way, or are they going to build up in the neutral zone and kind of copy from what some of the obviously the Penguins and the other teams have been doing. So I think that's the main thing they'll be working on, and obviously establishing a system, something we talked about endlessly this year with Boudreau and his system and getting back to their style of play. And that will be the main transition curve, I think, for the Ducks players this year. And like you mentioned, we'll obviously see a lot more of those top two lines than we're used to seeing with. Boudreau used to roll all four lines. I think we'll see a lot more of Getzlaf and Perry, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I think part of this that goes into it is this whole notion of the Corsi stats and the analytics and whatnot. We'll kind of go through some of the fan questions now, but Daniel asks about Carlyle's Corsi stats aren't that great. He hasn't done that well at that. Is that another concern amongst all this? And I mean, yeah, of course that's a concern. I mean, we have to look at analytics. You and I have talked about this before. We don't emphasize it as much maybe as some others do, but you can't ignore it either. It's definitely an important stat. I just don't put as much weight into it maybe as some of the others out there do. And given the way that Carlisle's done with this course, it's something that's going to have to be worked on. But he did talk about that in the press conference today, and he said, "Look, you have to have the puck more than the other team. That's just a fact. That's how you win games. You get more opportunities. You have to have puck possession." So I am concerned about it, but I think it goes back to all the stuff that you were talking about, Eddie. The biggest thing is playing that solid defense, but then the transition game, getting the puck, getting up the ice, and going that way, because it's not necessarily the fastest skaters that win this game. It's who can transition the game, be in the right position, make the right passes, and get that puck from your own zone to the other zone before the other team has a chance to set up and get that trap going. I mean, I think that's a huge, huge part of the NHL this year now, and because we've seen certain speed players not necessarily work. I mean, Hagelin worked in Pittsburgh, but he didn't work in Anaheim. Perron didn't work in Pittsburgh, and then he did work in Anaheim. I mean, so some of it's personnel stuff too. But I think if you want to be good at the Corsi stats and you want to be able to win, you got to not only get that puck, but you got to, get it up the ice fast, not necessarily by skating, but by moving it around.
Yeah, and it's not like you can't win if you don't have a good Corsi. We've talked about that endless amounts of times, and I think it's really not as important if you look at Carlisle's previous stats to now. I mean, he played in a team in Toronto where they were terrible. They couldn't, and that's not just on him either. They didn't have a lot of guys who could move the puck well. They didn't hold on to the puck well. They were more of a counter-attack team where they used most of their offense came through Phil Kessel, so they would just use his speed and his actual foot speed to punish teams, and they would kind of counterattack on you in that way. And then if you go back all the way to, I mean, you can't even really look at his past stats with the Ducks because, I mean, Corsi and advanced analytics and advanced stats and everything wasn't really as big of a deal when he was coaching Anaheim. So I think it's a completely different situation right now. He's obviously mentioned he's kept up, he's evolved as a coach. He understands analytics now. He also mentioned that it's not the only stat. I mean, it's a stat along with other stats. They'll look at everything to determine how they want to play hockey. But like we said before, I mean, it's not about just foot speed. It's about making the right decision. It's about getting it quickly out of your own end, transitioning, and obviously holding the puck in the neutral zone and creating play. What the Ducks' strength is over the last few seasons has been holding play in the opponent's end. And I think that will still be there. We've still got the right players to do that, to hold play in their own end, to forecheck and everything like that. And I think if you get the quick transition from the defense, from obviously the great playmaking defensemen that we have right now, and I think it should all come together. We have the right players to do so. Obviously, we'll add more through free agency or trade or whatever comes in this offseason. But that's definitely the big thing that I think they'll be focusing on right now. And we've heard it already from Carlyle and Murray in the press conference.
Yeah, that kind of goes into another fan question we had from Devin. Devin, he brought up the dump and chase strategy that we have already kind of talked about at length, and he brings up Pittsburgh and their speed and what they've done to be effective. And he kind of goes into the question of, well, are these trades that Murray's going to make, obviously they're going to be coming in the next couple of weeks. We know stuff is going to happen because there's no way the Ducks are going to re-sign all these players. So some players are going to walk and some players are going to get traded. But he thinks is that going to dictate how the trades are done? And I think, I think it will dictate how it's done. But I don't think there's a lot that the Ducks really need to do. I think that they, the last 4 years we've been there. I mean, we've been so close, and the lineup has changed each year. I mean, granted that obviously core players have been there throughout the 4 years, but there's been some changes. And I think he will tune some of it to more of this transition game and getting the puck up the ice. He mentioned it in the press conference today, Eddie, and I think that's the strategy. I mean, that's the way it's got to go. And like you said, it's not just the Penguins; it's all those top teams that made it far in the playoffs. If you look at the teams that do well and go far in the playoffs, it's not necessarily speed, it's not necessarily grit and all that, which all those are important, but it's being able to get that transition game, create turnovers, and just have the puck more than the other team. I mean, if you have it more than the other team, usually you're going to win. And that's what we saw, especially in the Eastern Conference and Western Conference finals and then the Stanley Cup final.
Yeah, and by no means, though, is the Pittsburgh Penguins style of play, the carbon copy for success. I mean, that could work for one team, and it's not going to work for another team. And I think the Ducks will look at that, and obviously that was the Penguins were mentioned a lot in the press conference, and obviously this season for good reason. They're obviously the best team in hockey. They won the Stanley Cup, but they just have the right players to fit that mold, and they brought in the other players to enhance that. They brought in Phil Kessel, they brought in Hagelin. They already had some quicker players. They had a lot of younger players who were quick as well, and Connor Sheary and Brian Rust, and I think it just worked for them. I mean, Crosby's no slouch either, and his speed, Malkin as well. And their blue line as well as young and quick and fast, and they can get the puck up the ice. So I think you can't really copy them. You can use that and you see that you need to be a quicker team with foot speed and with your transition play and everything like that. And they'll obviously make moves to go in that direction. But I don't think they have to copy what the Pittsburgh Penguins have done. I don't think the dump and chase game necessarily fits this Ducks team as it's built right now. I think they should focus on building up play through the middle. I think they have the right players to do that. Obviously, we'll have to wait and see the trades and everything they make, but I'm sure Murray and Carlyle have talked about the style of play they want to play for next season, and all the trades that will coming up in this draft and during free agency and everything like that will reflect that.
Yeah, and staying on the the trade topic, Adam here asks a question about there's been trade interest with Toronto. And it's been coming up, in the news here and there. We've seen some reports about that. And I think there is interest out there. I mean, Eddie, you live in that area and you hear it more. What are you hearing about, as far as Toronto and maybe the Ducks, wanting to make a move with them?
Yeah, and it wouldn't be anything like a huge blockbuster or anything like that. The Leafs are in no position to move that number one pick, so nothing like that would happen. But there's a lot of interest in both of the Ducks goalies, and depending on who they end up moving, I believe most of the interest is in Anderson, because it looks like they're leaning towards keeping Gibson. There's obviously no cement proof on that, but just with Freddie needing a contract and everything else going into it, age and anything like that. There's a lot of interest around the league from obviously Calgary has been up there and mentioned, Carolina at times as well for Freddie, and obviously Toronto. I mean, Bernier right now is their goalie, and their goalie depth after that is Sparks and Antoine Bibeau, which is nothing to really boast about. So they're obviously going to be interested. The asking price is something that we talked about that is difficult to judge right now with the goalie market being so thin. But those two teams also being desperate now, with Fleury being thrown into the mix as a possible, a possible name that's going to be traded this offseason from Pittsburgh, with the expansion draft likely coming at the end of next season. There's definitely interest. I mean, there's definitely interest, and the price is something that we could talk about endlessly, and it all depends on what it comes to at the draft time. I'm sure. I think we're almost all sure that one of the goalies will be traded before next season, and you would have to look at some of the young forward prospects they have there, but there's also the chance that a guy like James Van Riemsdyk finally makes a move out of Toronto and makes this long-awaited and rumored trip over to Anaheim. I think every season he's linked with the Ducks, so it all depends. Obviously, there's going to be interest, and we'll have to wait and see. The draft is in 10 days, so I'm sure it'll be a busy one for Murray.
And along the lines of the goalie situation that you brought up too, is next season, I'm pretty sure that it's just going to be one goalie running the show. So, that's going to be one less thing to deal with. I mean, obviously, this last season it was always interesting until towards the end when we got down to the 2-game rotation. It was like, okay, who's going to be the goalie? I'd sit there and write the pregame and just be like, okay, just going to put unconfirmed and throw anybody's name in there because you don't know who it really would be until the morning skate. So, I think that's one thing that we won't have to worry about. The Ducks will have one goalie to focus on, whoever it is. I mean, it's a tough decision. I like both of them. It's just a question of whether do you want to go with someone that's got a little bit more experience and a little bit older, or you want to go with someone that's a little bit younger and probably has more time on the back end, with the organization. And it's a tough one. I don't know. I don't know what the Ducks are going to do with that one, but I do know that it could be either one. From everything I've heard, the options have been weighed both ways. So that's one that's really going to be a big one to watch coming up here in the next couple of weeks, especially with the draft. And going along those lines, as far as the trade rumors and whatnot, we'll just have to see what's going to happen. I mean, there's been rumors too. Some people have asked. We had Paul. He asks about, will the Ducks trade one of the big guns if something happens under Carlyle? And I don't really see that happening. I just don't. I mean, obviously, we'd have to see what happens in the season and how it progresses and goes, obviously up till the trade deadline, during the regular season and all that, which we're getting way ahead of ourselves on that. But I don't really see them moving, big name players, Eddie. I think the Ducks are going to, work on retooling their forwards, trying to, keep some of these guys and bring in some other guys. They're going to make a decision at goal. And on defense, like you said, it's really the big one is probably Lindholm and Vatanen. They got to, I don't think they can keep both, but they got to try and keep one of those two. And I really think that's what the Ducks are going to focus on. I think they're going to keep the core, especially at the top. We've talked about maybe switching around the captain and the alternates. That's something that Carlyle is going to have to figure out. But other than that, I don't really see trades coming from the big guys. If for some reason the Ducks don't do well during the season, I just don't see that. Those contracts are so huge. I mean, there'd probably be other trades going on, but again, trying to get a little bit ahead of ourselves. But that's what I see as far as trades coming down the pipe.
Yeah, and the thing is trades like that they just don't happen anymore. You don't see those types of trades happen. That could maybe the closest one to that situation would be Phil Kessel leaving Toronto to go to Pittsburgh. And I mean, that's a different situation. The fact that Toronto is rebuilding and they're moving out their top asset to get some players in. And you look at that trade, and even now looking with the Penguins winning the Cup, that trade, heavily favors Pittsburgh. I don't think Toronto got the best return, and it's hard to get a return like that. if you're moving one of those guys, you're rebuilding. I mean, I don't care how bad the season is. If you move one of those guys, you're rebuilding because you're not going to get in a player of that quality. One for one trades, they don't happen with superstars in the NHL, and I'm not saying it could never happen. It just I don't see it happening with the Ducks. No matter how bad they're struggling, you don't trade guys like Getzlaf and Perry away at this point in their career and with the contracts they have. Just the only teams interested in them are teams who are going to be competing, and then a lot of those teams don't have the cap space or the assets to acquire a player like that. So realistically, we'll obviously see a goalie go. It all depends on the route they want to go. Obviously, the easy route right now is to trade Freddie with him, requiring a contract. But honestly, we both think it could go either way. And then you move into defense, and really, Lindholm's an RFA. We all hope he gets signed. We would love to see Vatanen stay around too, but realistically, we could see him go, and then a lot of players come in via free agency or other trades. So like we mentioned before, and I think in every podcast so far, the draft's coming closer now, so it's definitely going to be a busy time for the Ducks.
Now, going into next season, after the draft's done, the Ducks get whatever players they're going to get, and send some others on their way and whatnot. We have some questions about next season. One of the big ones James asks is about the playoffs, and he says, again, getting ahead of ourselves, but if we get into the playoffs next year, can we get rid of the Game 7 curses? And we talked about it before. It wasn't really necessarily a curse, but then after this last year, now it's been 4 years in a row. It's kind of hard to say it's not a curse, but the way you can look at this is, we've talked about it before, is you look at Carlyle when he was on the Ducks, and you look at the elimination games. When he was with Anaheim, his elimination game record was 11-6. A big chunk of those in Game 6s and 7s, and then also some in Game 4s and 5s. So not a bad record, almost two out of 3 ratio. If you then look at Boudreau, it's completely opposite. It's 3 out of 8. And granted, the Game 6s and Game 7s, it's 0. 1 for 8. We won that one against Dallas in Game 6, but all the rest, as you obviously know, and I'm not going to rehash, we would lose. So I think in terms of maybe not necessarily Game 7s, but in closeout games, Carlyle is going to give us that better opportunity to win those games because he's done it before. He's won Game 6s. He's 4-2 in Game 6s while he was at Anaheim. So if winning those, that's pretty good. You get in a Game 6 situation, he's won 2 out of 3, and the Ducks have avoided having to go to Game 7s as much under his tenure. The Ducks only went to 2 Game 7s. They won 1 and lost 1 under Carlyle. So I think it is a better situation. Granted, obviously, there's a lot of work to do. We've got to, get the lineup set and all the other stuff that's going on now in the next couple of months. But if the Ducks come out and do what they need to do in the regular season and are able to make the playoffs, I do like their chances better under Carlyle. The numbers are there, and I think they get it done. They were able to close out a lot better. Granted, that team was different, and this team's going to be different too. But I have more confidence, Eddie, in the playoffs with Carlisle, especially going into a Game 5, 6, or 7, and they're trying to win the series.
Yeah, and obviously we all expect the Ducks to make the playoffs next year, and I think if they get in a situation like that, we're all still going to be nervous no matter who's coaching behind the bench. It's happening. It's a thing that's happened. It's still going to be there next year, no matter what, with Boudreau there or not. This team as a whole has been terrible in elimination games over the past few seasons. So that is still going to be there. It's still going to be talked about, and it's going to be interesting to see how they deal with that pressure. And I think having a new coach definitely helps. There's going to be a new presence in the atmosphere, a new attitude about the team, and we'll have to see if that is enough to get over it. I think the play in those games has to be a lot better, and I think they know that. And having a new guy behind the bench, and like I said, a new attitude and a new philosophy and a new way to go about those elimination games when they get to them, I think that's going to definitely help. And I think the way Carlisle coaches is going to lend to that aspect. And I think, if they inevitably get into another Game 7 in the playoffs, it's going to be nerve-wracking. But I think they can finally put that to rest with Carlisle behind the bench.
Yeah, and speaking of playoffs and Game 7s and Game 6s and doing all that, and This is kind of a question that's probably come up each of the years that we've been doing this now, but we have Matt asks, is this a must-win, cup year for the Ducks? And honestly, I would say it is. I really think that the last couple seasons the Ducks could have won. Not that the last couple seasons weren't must wins, but I think if the Ducks are going to win the cup this season and maybe next season are probably the two biggest ones. Because after that, I don't know. I'd have to see, but I do think they really need to get it done sooner than later, and that's what Murray talked about too in the press conference. He said that the team needs to win now, and I think that's a larger reason why he did pick Carlisle, because they won under Carlisle as opposed to going with some other coach like McLean or Green, where they didn't really have a lot of experience. In Anaheim. So that's what I look at, Eddie. I mean, what do you think? You think the Ducks need to try to win it this year or next year, or do you think that they have a bigger window coming?
It's hard because the blue line is so young, and I think at that aspect, and even at goal, no matter who you choose, in 5 years, most of them are still under 30. Even if you keep Freddie, he's just over 30. So I think in that aspect, the window is open longer, but the real issue is up front with obviously Getzlaf, Perry, and Kessler as being our three main forwards and their age, and not a lot of prospects coming up at that quality to fill their place. I mean, obviously Raquel will still be here, you would expect, and Silverberg and a lot of the younger guys on the team if Richie's ready, Cardilli's, a lot of the prospects we have down in the youth system. But we've been drafting defense for so long, the prospect pool at left wing, center, and right wing isn't as deep as we'd like, and hopefully they address that in this draft, and trade up or draft, hit on a lower draft pick this year because yeah, their window I believe is really 2 to 3 more years realistically with the forward core they have right now. So if they're going to want to transition and pull off a sort of run like Pittsburgh, I mean not like Pittsburgh, like Detroit has over the last 20 or so years, making the playoffs every year, you're going to have to bring in young forwards who are going to be difference makers, and that starts with making trades or hitting on lower draft picks, and we mentioned them moving up possibly into the top five. So it's definitely a window that's closing, and if they're going to either remedy that by winning the cup in the next few years or by drafting some quality forward prospects, we'll have to wait and see.
And the other news, kind of shifting gears here, that came out today was Nate Thompson suffered an injury, a ruptured Achilles tendon, and he's going to be out. They're saying at least probably half the season. I mean, obviously he could come back sooner. We saw what he did with the shoulder injury, but what do you think in terms of how that affects, this draft and picking the players and trading? Do you think the Ducks try to maybe hang on to a Horkoff type of guy now instead with this, situation in front of us now?
Yeah, I think it changes free agency, and it maybe changes the structure of a trade that they might make. They might end up acquiring a fourth line, third line center to replace him, or most likely it changes their plans for free agency a little bit, as that's now a spot they're gonna have to fill. I mean, there's always an abundance of fourth line centers available during free agency, so I'm not too worried about how they're gonna fill that. I mean, it's not. It's obviously disappointing to see a guy like Thompson go down, but it's not Getzlaf, it's not Perry, it's not a big hole that you have to fill. You can fill it through free agency, you can fill it with some spare ends on a trade. So it's obviously disappointing to hear, but it changes their plans, but not too drastically that we have to worry about it.
Yeah, just another, thing that the Ducks are going to have to look at. I mean, this, like we said, this summer is just it's gonna be an intense summer. That was kind of the theme, I think, of the last podcast we talked about, and that's how it's gonna be. I mean, at least we have the coach now. Whether or not you agree with what the Ducks and Murray did, hey, we got to go with what we got now. We got to go forward. We got to support this team, and we got to just move on. It's time to figure out, like Murray likes to do. He does his priority list. He'll go through the RFAs and he'll go through the UFAs and he'll try and figure out who he can keep and who he can't keep. And, he goes through that whole process, and obviously he's pretty tight-lipped about it. And now he's got Carlisle, and they'll work on it, and they've had a good relationship before. So I'm not 100% on board with this move, but I don't hate the move either. I think it's going to be interesting. I'm just more concerned about the offense going forward, Eddie. That's my concern. But if the Ducks are able to keep the defensive play and the special teams play that they had from the last past season and seasons before, obviously, but really the last season, that's going to be key because as we talked about before, you got to have defense and you got to produce on special teams. If you can't get it done on that, it doesn't matter if you got a team that can score 10 goals. I mean, then you end up being like the Calgary Flames and you get in shootouts all the time, and that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win. So that's my take on it, Eddie, as the Ducks move forward.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat. I'm not overly excited, but I'm not at the same level as some of the fans have voiced so far, where there's no way. Some people have gone as far as saying they won't renew their season tickets next year because Carlisle is now the coach, and I think that's a little bit far. It's a little bit unfair to judge Randy on his previous tenure as Anaheim Ducks coach. In hockey, that's a long time for the game to develop and how it's changed. And I think a lot of us can agree the game has changed from even as early as 2011 from to what it is now. I think it's a lot different of a game. It's a lot quicker game, like we mentioned, with transition and even with foot speed. A lot younger game, a lot more younger players making their NHL debuts and being able to step in right away. And I think we can only really judge him when he starts and how they start the season and the style of play they decide to play. I think it's a little bit unfair to immediately hate the decision right off the bat. I don't think we're really going to be super excited about anybody who came in. I mean, barring Daryl Sutter not resigning with the LA Kings, there wasn't going to be much of a real significant replacement. I mean, if Travis Green comes in, we're all still going to have concerns. Is Kenny coach in the NHL? He has no experience. How is he going to mesh with the players? If a guy like Mike Yeo comes in, we talk about how he got fired from Minnesota and his play style. No matter who comes in, there's going to be issues. And I think obviously with Randy coaching here, in Anaheim before and how he left has a little bit of people on edge. But it's a little bit unfair, in my opinion, to look back at his previous tenure and say that's what's going to happen this time. I think we have to give him the benefit of the doubt. He said he's evolved as a coach, and I think he deserves to have a little bit of leeway, and we can wait to judge him and see how the Ducks play.
Yeah, I agree, Eddie. And I mean, he won the cup. I mean, come on, we can't forget that we won the cup, guys. With Randy Carlyle, and we made the playoffs every year he was there except for 1 year. And like we said, he's done better in those elimination games than Bruce has done. So those are some of the positive things. I'm not saying I don't have any reservations myself either. Of course I do. I have some as well. But like Eddie said, see what happens. The Ducks need to redo this lineup and get through the draft and then the free agency, and let's see what kind of team we have. Come July, August, and figure it out from there, because we really can't predict next season. And I saw I can't remember who, but a few people had tweeted me different, the odds already of next season and all this stuff. And don't listen to any of those people. I mean, this is way too early. The Stanley Cup was just won by Pittsburgh. I mean, you cannot sit around here and turn around and go, oh yeah, the Ducks are going to be, 1-8 or 1-16 or whatever. I've seen some of these numbers out there. So it's just way, way too early. And if you don't like Carlisle, I get it. I understand, he didn't get along with some of the players. And some of his methods are archaic. You can Google and see articles written on it by other people and myself and whatnot, and we know all that. But there's still a lot to be sorted out. So just let's wait and see. And if the Ducks start the season and things go south in September, or I'm sorry, in October and November, then then we'll start talking about it again. Hopefully it doesn't, because the first 2 months were painful this last season, especially for us, trying to be as positive as we could. So that's the way I would look at it. We've got some other news too coming around in the NHL to report, and we're going to cover that now, and we'll see what the Ducks do. But around the league, we've got another team that the Ducks are going to have to face, Eddie. It's not going to be this season, but it's going to be coming up soon. We've got Las Vegas is getting a bid here in the NHL. Speaking of, adding more teams, and they're going to come into this Pacific Division. Granted, everything gets finalized, which they have to come up with a big dollar amount, but I think it's kind of interesting, Eddie, because it's going to also change how the Ducks, play in the Pacific Division. Obviously, not this season, but when the Las Vegas team comes in, which they're supposed to be called the Black Knights, it's not official, but you've seen it plastered everywhere, so I'm pretty sure that's what the name's going to be. But I think it'll be interesting with only one team coming in, Eddie, being in the division and then not having the other team in the Central. So it's going to be a little bit of weird scheduling deal because it had been even, for the last couple seasons. So I'm excited though. I drive out to Vegas, go out there occasionally, and I'm definitely going to go watch the Ducks play when they're out there. So I'm glad. I'm glad they're bringing in their team, and I think it's exciting. It's just another thing to grow the sport of hockey, especially on the West Coast.
Yeah, and we've been talking about this almost all the way back to next year and the process that has taken place, and to see it's finally at least it's finally settled as the NHL's choice for expansion. It by no means it's completely done. The NHL has just pretty much chosen Vegas over Quebec City or Seattle or another Toronto team as its choice for expansion this time around. The organizers and the owners still have to come up with the $500 million expansion fee before that can
Damn.
be, yeah, before that can be, it's a big fee, but I'm sure they've all been informed of this process and what would happen and how much money they would need ahead of time. So I don't think there's any doubt that they'll be able to get a hold of the money. And then there also is still a Board of Governors meeting where they'll hold a formal vote, and that's apparently taking place on June 22nd. And two-thirds of that board must approve the recommendation of expansion. So by no means is it confirmed. The idea is it's most likely going to happen. Everybody seems to be on board with it, and the earliest that this team can be on the ice would be 2017-2018, which means that the expansion draft would be at the end of next season. And again, that affects the Ducks and many of other teams their dealings this offseason and everything like that. And with the decision on Vegas being made before the draft, I think that is definitely a huge deal. If everybody okays it, we would expect to hear that Vegas would be coming to the NHL for 2017-2018, which would change how a lot of teams, especially the Ducks and the Penguins with their goalie situation, how they're going to deal with trades during the draft. And then, like you said, with Vegas most likely coming to the Pacific Division, that throws a wrench kind of in the scheduling, especially for Pacific Division teams. We're used to playing Edmonton and Arizona and LA and San Jose, 5 or 6 times a season. And then having another team in there, you're going to have to limit the amount of times you maybe go face some of these Central Division teams. Obviously, the Eastern Conference ones don't change as much because we make one road trip out there a season. But I think, you end up taking some of those games away from maybe you don't play Chicago as many times, maybe you don't play St. Louis as many times, the Central Division teams. Maybe they cut back on how many teams they play in the Pacific Division. It's not a huge deal. It's only about 6 games per team, so it doesn't change the scheduling a whole ton. But it definitely affects the Ducks and other Pacific Division teams more than others.
Exactly, and it's going to be interesting bringing them in at an odd number of teams. So that's going to be something we'll have to watch and see, and it's going to obviously make the Pacific a little bit more competitive too, because you're going to have to add one more in there. And they'll be good though. They'll hopefully get another team in the Western Conference, and then it'll be balanced out. And then who knows? Maybe they'll add some more after that. But this is definitely something to be excited about, something to look forward to. I was just in Vegas recently and went by the stadium, and it looks very good. So I'm excited. Another team out in the West. So that's something to look forward to. And really, the only other news that came up in the last week was the Pittsburgh Penguins, as we mentioned throughout this podcast. Winning the Stanley Cup, Eddie. I think Phil Hewitt, you and I were probably the only ones that picked Pittsburgh. Looked like most of the experts out there said that San Jose was just going to run away with it, and nothing could have been further from the truth in this series. You look at these games. I'm not going to go over all of them, but if you really look at this series, other than Game 5. The score may not have reflected it, but if you watch the games, Pittsburgh really took it to the Sharks. I mean, they were winning the faceoffs, they were getting the shots, they were possessing the puck, they were blocking shots like crazy. Bonino was going nuts, blocking, I think, almost everything that was in front of him. I'm sure his knees are just sore as all hell because he was blocking so many shots. And it was a good series. And Murray really shined. He battled it out. Jones did phenomenal for the Sharks. Really kept them in some of the games, but it was Pittsburgh coming out on top. and just kind of what we expected. We thought Pittsburgh would win, and they did it, Eddie. So kind of happy. It's my second favorite team, so I'd rather have been the Ducks, of course, but it's just the way it went. So I'm happy for the Penguins and the five former Ducks on the team winning.
Yeah, and really at the beginning of the playoffs, I picked two teams outside. Obviously, we had the bracket challenge, and I had the Ducks in one bracket, but in the other bracket, I had St. Louis and Pittsburgh going all the way, and obviously Pittsburgh ends up winning it, and just the way they played at the end of the season, they started slow as well, just like the Ducks, and they turned it on, and they played probably the best hockey out of any team. Even the Ducks going into the playoffs, they were that good. They were, everybody was firing. Crosby was playing well. He started slow. Malkin was playing good, even though he was injured close to the end of the season. Letang was playing well. He was battling with some injuries. And then obviously we talked about Murray being so good, coming in late in the season and then winning 15 games, tying the record, Cam Ward's record for a rookie goalie in the playoffs. And, it was just a team that was really that could just win it all. The way they played, it solidifies the idea that coming in hot into the playoffs is definitely a good thing for your team. They played well against the Rangers. They played well against Washington. They played well against Tampa Bay, and then they played well against San Jose. They didn't really have any faults in their game. Obviously, they lost a couple games here and there, but they really didn't look like they could beat. And obviously, in the end, they ended up winning it. And really, that's big ups to Crosby as well. But for the GM to bring in some of these players, and they all played such a key role in the playoffs. Obviously, Phil Kessel, I believe he led them in points. Hagelin played really well on the line with Bonino. So I mean, just the players that he brought in and the team that they were able to assemble, just it was too good, and it was the reason they ended up winning the cup.
Yeah, and when I look at it too, and obviously going by the comments in Murray's interview today too, because they brought up Pittsburgh again. I think it's just big motivation here for Anaheim. I mean, you got to look at what they did. They went through similar struggles that the Ducks went through this season. Like you mentioned, they started out poor in the first couple months. They turned things around, just like the Ducks turned things around. The only difference is, we stuck with Boudreaux the whole season, where Pittsburgh changed out their coaches, and it's unfortunate, but I really think the Ducks could have got that far. I think some of the issues that they had were, obviously the first two games they didn't play well against Nashville, but they also had a ton of injuries too. And I know all the other teams go through injuries too, but just saying the Ducks had a good amount. Perron was a big one. Bieksa wasn't 100%. Kessler had some nagging things here and there. So, those are the things that I think maybe hindered them. But the teams were kind of on a similar course. I think that it would have been great to see the Ducks get that far. But that just came up short, unfortunately. But I think that Pittsburgh's definitely a model for the Ducks to maybe not copy 100%, like you said, Eddie, but definitely in some of the basics, some of the things that the Ducks can do next season. And I just want to wrap up the podcast. The other big news this week. Want to give our condolences out to Gordie Howe and his family. If you didn't know, he passed away. Unfortunately, he had different health complications. Obviously, recently there had been different reports. And another legend. A guy that really built up the sport of hockey. Obviously, playing for Detroit most of the time, but just a good guy, and it's unfortunate to see him go. But there's nothing I can really say. He's just a great player. Played a long time in the league. True class act. A good motivator. Inspiration to the fans, but other players as well out there. They've talked about it. Gretzky and some of the others have talked. And there's even talk too, Eddie, that they're trying to push and maybe retire the number 9 in the league. So we may see something like that, and definitely deservedly so.
Yeah, and there's a reason he was called Mr. Hockey for sure. I mean, he's arguably the greatest player of his generation and possibly ever to play in the NHL. I mean, the style of hockey he played was different from anyone at the time. He played a physical game. He scored at will, and I mean, it's obviously a huge loss for the hockey community. It's been felt, everywhere since it was released, and. No, I mean, I would definitely be before retiring the number 9. I think he's had just as big an impact as Gretzky has had on hockey, if not more. So I think it would be a great thing for the NHL to do. I'm not sure if they would do it. It's obviously something that they don't take lightly, obviously with the number
Right.
99 being the only number retired by the NHL. But I think if you were going to do it for any other player, I think you would have to do it for Gordie Howe. I mean, him and Gretzky are probably the two most influential and best players to ever play the game. So I think it would be fitting for them to do that, in either next season or coming up in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and just to go off that, we'll see. Maybe the league will, and it's definitely deservedly so. And like you said, well-rounded player. The Gordie Howe hat trick, able to score and fight and get assists. He could do it all. So it's just a big loss. But that his memory is going to go on, and obviously other players are going to continue to build off of that. And there'll be, there may not be people that'll follow like him, but there'll definitely be people that push the sport and continue its growth and whatnot. And obviously, we keep seeing it in the West Coast as Vegas is now getting a team as well, which is awesome. So with that, we're going to wrap up the show, and we'll be back. I don't know if it'll be in a week or 2 weeks. Kind of wait on the news. It might be closer to the draft and whatnot. But stay tuned, and we'll still have articles coming up. Now that the coaching's done, we'll kind of start focusing more towards the draft picks. If you haven't seen it already, Thomas has been writing some articles analyzing whether or not the Ducks would, trade up in the first 5 spots or 6 through 10 and whatnot. So look for those. He's been working hard. He's been looking at different scenarios and whatnot, and it'll be interesting to see if some of them pan out or not. So with that, we'll see you in a week or two, and let's go Ducks.